Amelie lived in Abuja with her husband Kelechi and their little girl, Zola. To her, life felt safe and full. Kelechi was charming, successful, and always smiling when they were together. She believed she had found her forever love. But then, small whispers began to reach her. Friends spoke in low voices, neighbors avoided her eyes. They said Kelechi had been seen with a younger woman named Nneka. At first, Amelie pushed the thought away, telling herself it was just gossip. She wanted to believe her husband would never betray her. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it began to grow. Kelechi became distant, spending more nights working late, his phone always face down. Amelie felt the walls of her marriage begin to crack. She didn't know that behind his easy smile, Kelechi was building a life with Nneka in secret. And she could never imagine how far their betrayal would go. While Amelie tried to hold her family together, Kelechi was making a decision that would change everything. One quiet evening, as rain clouds gathered over Abuja, Amelie looked at her daughter playing on the rug and promised herself she would protect her no matter what. She didn't know that the danger wasn't outside her home, it was right there, sharing her table, wearing the ring she had placed on his finger. And soon, the man she loved would choose a path that would shatter their family forever. The rain had been falling since afternoon, steady and cold, beating against the windows like tiny fists. Amelie was in the kitchen, humming softly while making dinner. Zola sat in the living room, her crayons scattered across the table as she drew pictures of houses and smiling faces. The air smelled faintly of stew, and the sound of the rain made the small home feel warm and safe. But that night was not going to be safe at all. Kelechi walked in looking tired, but his eyes held something darker. He kissed Zola on the forehead, glanced at Amelie, and went straight to their bedroom. She thought nothing of it, not knowing that this was the last night she would ever see the man she once loved as her husband. Hours later, as the rain grew heavier and thunder rolled in the distance, a strange smell began to spread through the house. Amelie frowned, sniffing the air. Before she could investigate, an explosion shattered the quiet. The walls shook, and flames roared to life, leaping across the ceiling like wild animals. Smoke filled the rooms in seconds. Amelie screamed for Zola and rushed toward her, but the fire was faster, hot and suffocating. Her lungs burned with every breath. She could hear her daughter crying somewhere in the smoke. Outside, Kelechi stood under the rain with Nneka at a distance, watching. His face was blank, his hands in his pockets. To the neighbors who rushed out in shock, he shouted, "Gas leak." It was a gas leak. His voice cracked in just the right places to sound like grief. But only he and Nneka knew it was no accident. The fire brigade arrived too late. The small home was already swallowed by flames. Neighbors wept, holding umbrellas over their heads as the smell of smoke and wet ash filled the air. The next morning, the city woke to the news. Radio stations spoke of a tragic accident that had claimed the lives of a beloved young mother and her little girl. People called Kelechi a heartbroken husband. Some even donated money to help him recover from his loss. But behind closed doors, in a quiet apartment where no one could see them, Kelechi and Nneka drank wine together. She laughed softly, her head resting on his shoulder, and asked if anyone suspected. He shook his head, smiling for the first time in days. They spoke in low voices about the future and how free they now felt. Outside, life went on as usual. No one knew the truth, that Amelie's death had been planned, that Zola's screams had been ignored, and that love had turned into something cold and deadly. The city mourned a tragedy. Kelechi wore his grief like a well-tailored suit, perfect for public eyes. But the truth was buried in the ashes, hidden from everyone except him and the woman who had replaced his wife. And while the world pitied him, the man they comforted was the very one who had set the fire that destroyed his own family. The fire had turned the small house into a black, smoking ruin. The rain kept falling, but it could not put out the flames fast enough. When the fire was finally gone, the place was nothing but ash, broken wood, and twisted metal. No one noticed the tiny figure lying under a fallen beam at the edge of the yard. Zola was barely breathing, her small body covered in soot. Her cries were weak, almost drowned out by the sound of the rain. A truck driver named Kojo was passing through the area that night. He had been driving for hours from Abuja toward Ghana, and the storm had slowed him down. As he passed the smoking ruins, something told him to stop. He got out of his truck, pulling his coat tighter against the cold. He thought maybe he could help the people inside, but when he stepped closer, he saw only wreckage. Then, he heard it, a faint whimper. He pushed aside the debris and found a little girl, her big eyes glassy and full of fear. She was too weak to speak, but her tiny hand clung to his sleeve. Without thinking twice, Kojo picked her up and carried her to his truck. The hospital was too far, and Kojo knew she wouldn't survive the trip if he waited. So he drove straight to his village in Ghana, a quiet place surrounded by green hills and dirt roads. There, his sister, Abina, helped nurse the girl back to health. Zola had no memory of who she was, where she came from, or what had happened. The doctors said it was trauma. Her mind had locked away the pain to protect her. She didn't even remember her own name. Abina and Kojo decided to call her Ayanda, which meant, they are increasing, a name for someone whose life was a blessing. Ayanda grew up believing she had been abandoned as a baby, found by Kojo on the road. She learned to fetch water from the well, help Abina cook stews over a wood fire, and dance barefoot at village festivals. She was cheerful and kind, with a smile that made even strangers feel like family. Years passed, and Ayanda became a bright young woman. She loved books and dreamed of studying in the city. Kojo worked extra hours, saving every coin to make her dream come true. She never knew the truth, that her real family had died in a fire, that her father was still alive, and that the man who should have protected her had left her to burn. She had no idea that her past was waiting for her, like a shadow that would not stay hidden forever. For Ayanda, life was simple and happy in the village. But sometimes, in her dreams, she saw flashes, the sound of rain, the crackle of fire, a woman's voice calling her name. She would wake up with tears on her cheeks, confused and unsettled. She didn't know those dreams were memories, trying to return. And one day, they would come back in a way that would change everything. Ayanda was 19 when she finally left the quiet village in Ghana. Kojo had worked for years to save enough money for her to attend university in Lagos. The day she boarded the bus, Abina cried and hugged her tightly, slipping a small packet of food into her bag. Ayanda was nervous but excited. The city felt like another world, tall buildings, endless traffic, bright lights, and a sea of strangers moving in every direction. For the first time, she felt both completely free and completely alone. At university, Ayanda threw herself into her studies. She wanted to make Kojo proud and repay the kindness he had shown her. She made a few friends, but most days she kept to herself. Then, one afternoon in the campus library, she met Toby. He was tall, well-dressed, and carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never known real struggle. When he asked if he could share her table, she smiled politely. Over time, their short conversations turned into long ones. Toby made her laugh in a way she hadn't laughed in years. They started spending more time together, studying in cafes, walking through the busy streets, watching the city lights at night. Toby was different from anyone she had known. He listened when she spoke, teased her when she got too serious, and told her she was the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. Ayanda didn't know much about his family, only that they were wealthy and lived in a big house in Lagos. She never imagined that his father was a man who had once stood in the rain, watching her home burn. Toby, for his part, didn't know her past either. All he saw was a girl with kind eyes and a warm heart. He liked how she didn't care about his expensive clothes or the fact that his family was one of the most influential in the city. Ayanda treated him like an ordinary boy, and that made him want her even more. Weeks turned into months, and their friendship slowly became something deeper. Ayanda felt safe with him, in a way she couldn't explain. Sometimes, though, she would catch herself wondering why his smile felt familiar, or why his presence stirred something strange inside her. But she pushed those thoughts away. She told herself it was just love, new and exciting. When Toby finally asked her to be his girlfriend, it was under the glow of streetlights after a long walk home. She said yes without hesitation. Neither of them knew that their love was built on a secret so dark it could destroy them both. They didn't know that fate had been quietly leading them back to each other, not for romance, but for the truth. For now, they were just two young people in love, holding hands in a city that never slept. But somewhere in the shadows, the past was waiting, patient, silent, and ready to break their hearts. Toby had been talking about introducing Ayanda to his parents for weeks. He said they were excited to meet her, that they would love her as much as he did. Ayanda felt both nervous and hopeful. She wanted to make a good impression. She wore a simple but pretty dress and a pair of small gold earrings Abina had given her before she left Ghana. On the way to his house, she held Toby's hand and smiled, unaware that she was about to face the man who had once watched her world burn. When they arrived, Ayanda was stunned by the size of the house. Tall gates, guards at the entrance, a driveway so long she could barely see the end. Inside, everything smelled of polished wood and fresh flowers. The walls were lined with paintings, and a huge chandelier sparkled in the middle of the living room. Toby's mother, Nneka, appeared first. She was beautiful, with smooth skin and an expensive dress, but her eyes were cold and sharp, scanning Ayanda from head to toe. Her smile looked polite, but Ayanda could feel it wasn't real. Then Toby led her into the dining room, where his father, Kelechi, was waiting. He stood up when they entered, his tall frame casting a shadow across the table. The moment his eyes met Ayanda's, his smile froze. For a second, it felt like time stopped. Those eyes. He knew those eyes. They were the same ones he had seen 12 years ago, wide with fear, reflecting the light of the flames as a little girl screamed for help. Ayanda had no idea why he was staring at her like that. She smiled warmly and greeted him with respect, thinking maybe he was just surprised. Kelechi forced himself to nod and sit down, but his hands trembled slightly under the table. His mind was racing. He had been so sure she had died that night. How could she be alive? Dinner started, but the atmosphere was tense. Toby tried to keep the conversation going, talking about school and making jokes, but Kelechi barely touched his food, and Nneka kept glancing between him and Ayanda. Every time Ayanda laughed or looked up, Kelechi's eyes flickered with something between shock and fear. Nneka noticed his expression and realized instantly. Her heart began to pound. She picked up her wine glass to hide her shaking hand. At one point, she leaned toward Kelechi and whispered, "We'll talk later." He didn't respond, just kept watching Ayanda as if she might vanish if he blinked. Ayanda, feeling the strange tension, thought maybe they didn't like her. She tried to be extra polite, but nothing seemed to ease the stiffness in the room. She had no idea that across from her sat the man who had stolen her past, and next to him was the woman who had taken her mother's place. For Toby, it was just a family dinner. For Kelechi and Nneka, it was the moment their worst nightmare walked right through their front door. That night after Ayanda left, the big house felt colder than usual. Nneka paced the bedroom like a trapped animal, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. She had barely spoken during dinner, but now the words poured out of her in a rush. "It's her, Kelechi. I know it. I saw it in your face." Her voice trembled, not with sadness but with fear. Kelechi sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, his hands clasped together. "It can't be," he muttered, but his eyes betrayed him. He knew she was right. Those eyes, they belonged to the little girl he had left behind in the fire. Nneka's breathing quickened. "If she knows who she is, everything we've built will be gone. Do you understand? The business, the house, the life, gone. You need to handle it before she remembers." Her words were sharp, each one pressing harder on Kelechi's conscience. He didn't answer, his mind racing between denial and panic. He had killed once to protect his secret. Could he do it again? Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Toby lay in bed replaying the dinner in his head. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. His parents had been acting strange the moment Ayanda walked in, stiff smiles, nervous glances, and long silences. His father barely spoke to her, yet couldn't take his eyes off her. His mother's laugh had sounded forced, like she was pretending. Toby knew his parents well enough to sense when they were hiding something. The next morning, over breakfast, Toby tried to bring it up casually. "So, what did you think of Ayanda?" he asked. Kelechi froze mid-bite, then forced a smile. "She's nice," he said flatly. Nneka, without looking up from her coffee, mumbled, "Yes, very nice." But their voices were too measured, too careful. Toby narrowed his eyes. In their bedroom later, Nneka's panic grew worse. "He's not stupid, Kelechi. If Toby starts asking questions, we're finished. Do you want him to find out the truth from her?" She leaned close, lowering her voice as if the walls could hear. "End it now, before it's too late." Kelechi snapped his head toward her, his jaw tight. "Do you think I haven't thought of that?" he hissed. "But she doesn't remember. If she did, she wouldn't be sitting at our table smiling." Nneka shook her head. "Memory comes back. You know it can. One dream, one flash, and she'll know everything." She gripped his arm hard, her nails digging into his skin. "We can't take that chance." Across town, Toby texted Ayanda, asking if she'd noticed anything strange about his parents. She replied with a laughing emoji, saying she just thought they were nervous. But as Toby put his phone down, his gut told him it was more than that. Something deep, something ugly, was hiding in his family, and somehow, Ayanda was at the center of it. In the quiet of their bedroom, Nneka whispered one last thing before turning off the light. "If you don't do something, Kelechi, she'll destroy us." Neither of them slept that night. It started on a quiet Saturday afternoon. Toby had gone up to the attic to look for some old family documents. Dust floated in the sunlight as he pushed aside boxes of books and photo albums. He opened one box that looked older than the rest, its cardboard soft from years of sitting untouched. Inside were random things, faded receipts, yellowed letters, and a small stack of photographs tied together with a ribbon. He untied it and began flipping through. Most were of him as a child, his parents smiling beside him. But then one picture stopped him cold. It was a photograph of a young woman holding a little girl, both smiling brightly at the camera. The woman was not his mother, and the girl had Ayanda's face. Same wide eyes, same dimple in her cheek. The back of the photo had one word written in neat handwriting, Zola. Toby's heart began to pound. He carried the photo downstairs, gripping it so hard his knuckles turned white. His parents were in the dining room, having coffee. "Who is this?" he asked, holding up the picture. Kelechi froze. Nneka's eyes darted from the photo to Kelechi, her lips parting but no words coming out. "It's complicated," Kelechi finally said, his voice low. But Toby wasn't letting go. "No, I want the truth. Who is she? Why do I have a picture of my girlfriend as a child in our house?" His voice rose with every word. Kelechi's hands shook. He looked at Nneka, then back at his son. She's your half-sister," he said at last, his voice breaking. The words hung in the air like a bomb. Toby stared at him in disbelief, his chest tightening. "What are you talking about?" Kelechi took a deep breath, and the confession poured out. The affair with Nneka, the fire, the lie about the gas leak. He admitted that Amelie, Ayanda's mother, had died in that fire, and that Zola had been believed dead too. He told them how he had walked away from the flames, thinking no one had survived. The room fell into stunned silence, broken only by Toby's sharp, uneven breathing. Then his chair scraped against the floor as he stood up so fast it nearly tipped over. "You killed her family," he shouted. "You tried to kill her." His voice cracked, anger mixing with disgust. Nneka tried to calm him, reaching out a hand, but Toby stepped back. "Don't touch me," he snapped. Ayanda, who had just arrived and stood frozen at the doorway, heard every word. Her knees felt weak. The truth hit her like a wave, and her heart felt like it was splitting in two. The dinner table that had once been a place for polite conversation was now filled with shouts, sobs, and the sound of a family falling apart. In that moment, nothing could be undone. The lies had burned for 12 years, but the truth had finally set itself on fire. Ayanda stood in the doorway for a long moment after the shouting stopped. Her chest felt heavy, her hands cold. She looked at Toby, his face pale and eyes full of guilt, and she knew nothing could ever be the same. She loved him, but his blood was the same as the man who had taken everything from her. Without a word, she turned and walked out. Toby called her name, but she didn't stop. That night, she sat alone in her small apartment, staring at the old photograph Toby had found. Memories she thought were gone now played in her mind, her mother's warm smile, the sound of rain, the roar of flames. Her hands shook, but her decision was clear. She could not let them keep living like nothing had happened. The next morning, Ayanda walked into the police station with the photo and every detail she had learned. The officers listened in silence as she told her story from start to finish. They asked if she was ready for what would follow. She nodded. By evening, police cars pulled up in front of the grand house. Neighbors gathered, whispering in shock as officers led Kelechi out in handcuffs. Nneka followed, her face pale and furious, shouting that it was all lies. But the truth was already out. The news spread quickly across the city. People who once pitied Kelechi now looked at him with disgust. They finally knew what had really happened on that rainy night 12 years ago. Ayanda watched from a distance, her heart aching but her spirit steady. Justice had come at last. She turned away from the flashing lights and walked into the night, leaving the past behind her.